I stood in the doorway of my own office and watched my mother slip the brass key into her purse like it had always belonged to her. The air smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish. I'd spent 3 weeks getting that room ready. New desk. Filing cabinets I assembled myself because I couldn't afford to pay someone. A whiteboard on the wall where I'd written out my first quarter goals in blue marker. My laptop was still open on the desk, screen glowing with the invoicing software I'd been learning to use. Everything in that room I had earned. Every single thing. But my mother stood there in her cream-colored blazer with the gold buttons, the one she wore when she wanted to look important, and she told me I was being dramatic. She said I didn't understand how family businesses worked. She said I was too emotional to make good decisions right now. She said the office space would be better used by someone who actually knew what they were doing. And when I opened my mouth to argue, when I felt my throat tighten and my hands start to shake, she held up one finger and said the only words I'll ever put in quotes because they burned into my brain like a brand. "Ren, sweetheart, you're embarrassing yourself. My name is Ren Holloway. I'm 31 years old." And that morning, standing in the hallway of the commercial building I'd leased with my own savings, I realized my mother had been planning this for weeks. The locksmith was already there. A guy in a gray uniform with a tool belt, standing off to the side like he'd seen family drama before and wanted no part of it. My mother must have called him before she even arrived. She must have known exactly what she was going to do. She must have practiced the words in her head on the drive over. The tone. The look of patient disappointment she gave me when I started to cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there while she explained that she'd spoken to my landlord, that she'd signed the lease so technically she had every right, that this was for my own good, because I'd been making poor choices lately, and someone needed to step in before I ruined everything. My brother was there too. Garrett. He leaned against the wall with his arms crossed and said nothing. Didn't look at me. Didn't defend me. Just stood there like a piece of furniture while our mother dismantled my life. The locksmith changed the lock. I heard the drill. I heard the old pins drop into his hand. I watched him test the new key and hand it to my mother, and she smiled at him the way she smiled at waiters and bank tellers. Polite. Gracious. The smile of someone who'd just done a reasonable thing. She told me I could come by later to pick up my personal items. She'd box them up for me, she'd make sure nothing got damaged. She said it like she was doing me a favor. Then she walked past me. Didn't touch me. Didn't hug me. Just walked past with Garrett trailing behind her, and I stood there in that hallway with my hands shaking, and my chest so tight I thought I might pass out. The building was quiet. It was early. No one else had seen it happen. But I felt like the whole world had just watched me get erased. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I want you to know that what I did later, what I became, what I took from her, it didn't start with anger. It started with that moment. Standing alone in a hallway that smelled like lemon polish, realizing the person who gave birth to me had just stolen my future because she could. My name is Ren Holloway. And before everything fell apart, I was the kind of person who believed that hard work and loyalty were enough to build a life on. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a house where dinner conversations were about business strategy and market positioning. My father ran a small consulting firm before he died when I was 19. My mother took it over. She wasn't warm, but she was competent, respected. She taught me that family came first, always. That blood meant something. I believed her. By the time I turned 30, I'd spent 7 years working in her company. I wasn't just an employee. I managed 3 accounts. I closed deals she couldn't close because I had patience she didn't have. I worked late. I covered for Garrett when he screwed up, which was often. I never complained. I thought I was building towards something. A partnership. Maybe ownership someday. She'd hinted at it once, years ago, over coffee at the kitchen table. She said, I had a good head for this kind of work. So when I told her I wanted to start my own branch, My own consulting office that would still operate under the family umbrella. She smiled. She said it sounded like a smart move. She even helped me find the lease. A small commercial space in southeast Portland near Hawthorne. Exposed brick. Big windows. It felt like the beginning of something real. I spent my savings on it. $15,000 for the first 6 months of rent, furniture, licenses, insurance. I worked weekends painting the walls. I bought a secondhand desk from a guy on Craigslist and assembled it with a screwdriver and a YouTube tutorial. My best friend Iris came by one Saturday and helped me hang shelves. We drank cheap wine straight from the bottle and laughed about how official it all felt. I remember standing in that office the night before I planned to officially open. The streetlights outside glowed orange through the windows. I took a picture of my desk with my phone. I texted it to my mother with the caption, "Almost ready." She replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was it. I didn't think anything of it. I thought I was building my future. I thought I was finally stepping out of her shadow. I thought she was proud. I was wrong. The morning she took it from me, I'd gone in early to set up my laptop and organize client files. She arrived 20 minutes later with Garrett and a locksmith. I already told you what happened in that hallway, but what I didn't tell you was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears when I realized she wasn't joking. The way my hands went numb. The way Garrett looked at the floor like he couldn't bear to see me cry. I left the building without my laptop, without my files, without my keys. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 40 minutes and stared at the steering wheel. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to call. Iris was at work. My father was dead. The only family I had left had just locked me out of my own life, so I drove home. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Southeast. A third-floor walk-up with a view of a laundromat. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I sat on the couch and I didn't move for hours. I didn't eat. I didn't cry anymore. I just sat there and replayed the morning over and over in my head, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. If you're watching this, go ahead and hit subscribe. I want you to hear the rest of this. I want you to know what happens when someone takes everything from you and then tells you it's for your own good. And hey, quick question. Where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious. The signs were there. I just didn't see them. 3 months before she took my office, my mother stopped including me in client meetings. She said it was because I needed to focus on my own branch, on getting my new space ready. It sounded reasonable. I didn't question it. But looking back, I realized she was already cutting me out. She was making sure the clients didn't see me as essential. She was erasing me slowly. So when she finally pushed me out, no one would notice I was gone. Garrett started taking credit for my work around that time too. I'd draft a proposal, send it to my mother for approval, and then she'd forward it to a client with Garrett's name on it. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. I mentioned it to her over the phone. She laughed. She said it didn't matter whose name was on it as long as the work got done. She said I was being petty. I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. Family business, right? We all contribute. We all benefit. But then it happened again. And again. And every time I brought it up, she'd sigh like I was exhausting her. She'd say I was being insecure. She'd say I needed to focus on the bigger picture. So I stopped bringing it up. I swallowed it. I kept working. There was a morning, maybe 6 weeks before everything collapsed, when I walked into the main office to drop off some paperwork. I saw my mother and Garrett in the conference room. The door was closed, but the blinds were open. They were looking at a laptop screen together. And my mother was pointing at something, explaining. Garrett was nodding. He looked focused. Engaged. It was the most interested I'd ever seen him in the business. I knocked on the glass. My mother glanced up, smiled briefly, and waved me away. Not rudely, just casually, like I was interrupting something important. I stood there for a second, holding the folder I'd brought, and then I turned around and left. I felt stupid. I felt like a child trying to get her mother's attention. That same week, I went to lunch with Iris. We met at a cafe near her apartment, a place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menace. I told her I was excited about the new office. I told her I thought this was finally my chance to prove I could lead something on my own. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She asked me if my mother had put anything in writing. A contract. An agreement. Anything that made it clear the office was mine. I said no. I said it was family. We didn't need contracts. Iris didn't say anything for a long time. She just stirred her coffee and looked out the window. Finally, she said she hoped I was right. But her tone told me she didn't think I was. I should have listened. 2 weeks later, my mother asked me to come to her house for dinner. She lived in a large craftsman-style home in the West Hills, the kind of house with a view of the city, and a 2-car garage. Garrett was already there when I arrived. He was sitting on the couch with a beer, watching a basketball game on the big flat-screen TV. He barely looked at me when I walked in. My mother was in the kitchen. She'd made roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the same meal she used to make on Sundays when I was a kid. She smiled when she saw me. She asked how the office was coming along. I told her it was almost ready. I told her I'd been working on a pitch for a new client, someone I'd met through a networking event. She nodded. She said that was great. She said she was proud of me. But then, over dinner, she started asking questions. Who was the client? What kind of contract were they looking for? What was my pricing structure? I answered everything. I was excited to share. I thought she was interested. I thought she was mentoring me. Garrett asked a few questions too. He seemed unusually engaged. He wanted to know about my timeline, my budget, my marketing plan. I thought maybe he was finally taking the business seriously. I thought maybe we were going to work together like a real team. I was so stupid. After dinner, my mother walked me to the door. She hugged me. She told me to let her know if I needed anything. She said she was always there for me. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I thought things were finally falling into place. 3 days later, I found out she'd contacted my potential client directly. She'd offered them a lower rate and positioned herself as the primary consultant. She cut me out completely. The client didn't even know I existed. When I called her, she acted confused. She said she was just trying to help. She said I didn't have enough experience to handle a client like that on my own. She said she was protecting me from failure. She said it so calmly, like it was obvious. Like I should thank her. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just hung up the phone and sat on my couch and stared at the wall. That was the first time I felt it. That cold, sinking realization that my mother didn't see me as a partner. She saw me as competition, and she was going to win. The morning she took my office, I arrived at 7:30. The building was quiet. Most of the other tenants didn't show up until 9. I liked the stillness. I liked being the first one there, unlocking the door, turning on the lights, making coffee in the little single-serve machine I'd bought for the corner table. But when I got to my door, the key didn't work. I stood there for a moment, confused. I tried it again. Nothing. I thought maybe the lock was sticking. It was an old building. Things didn't always work right. I was about to call the landlord when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. My mother was walking down the hallway. She was wearing her cream blazer. Her hair was perfect. She looked like she was going to a business meeting. Behind her was Garrett, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. And behind him was a man in a gray uniform with a tool belt. I felt my stomach drop before she even said a word. She smiled at me. Not a warm smile, a polite one. The kind you give a stranger. She said good morning. She said we needed to talk. She said it would be better if I stayed calm. I asked her why my key didn't work. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. I sounded like a kid asking why she couldn't have dessert. She said she'd had the locks changed. She said she'd been thinking a lot about my situation, about my readiness to run my own office, and she'd come to the conclusion that I wasn't ready. She said I was impulsive. I was emotional. I made decisions based on feelings instead of logic. She said she couldn't stand by and watch me fail. She said this was an intervention. I stared at her. I didn't understand. I asked her what she was talking about. I said the office was mine. I'd paid for it. I'd set it up. I'd done everything. She shook her head. She said I was mistaken. She said she'd signed the lease, which meant she had legal authority to make decisions about the space. She said she'd spoken to the landlord that morning. She said the landlord agreed with her assessment. She said this was for my own good. I felt my hands start to shake. I asked her if she was serious. I asked her if she was really doing this. I asked her why. She sighed. She looked at me the way you'd look at a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was proving her point. She said if I couldn't handle this conversation without getting emotional, then I clearly wasn't ready to run a business. Garrett still hadn't said anything. He just stood there. I looked at him. I said his name. I asked him if he was really going to let this happen. He shrugged. He said Mom knew what she was doing. He said I should listen to her. Then he looked away. The locksmith stepped forward. He asked my mother if she was ready for him to start. She said yes. She handed him a new key, still in its package. She must have had it made ahead of time. She must have planned this down to the minute. I asked her what I was supposed to do. I asked her where I was supposed to go. She said I could come back to the main office if I wanted. She said there was always a place for me there, as long as I was willing to follow her lead. She said it like she was offering me a gift. The locksmith started drilling. The sound echoed in the hallway. I felt my chest tighten. I felt tears start to burn behind my eyes. I didn't want to cry in front of her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. But I couldn't stop it. She watched me. She didn't comfort me. She didn't apologize. She just watched. And then she said the words I'll never forget. "Ren, sweetheart, you're embarrassing yourself." Her voice was soft, almost kind, like she was trying to help me, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out how pathetic I looked. I turned around. I walked away. I didn't say anything else. I didn't beg. I didn't fight. I just left. I walked down the hallway, down the stairs, out into the parking lot. I got in my car and I sat there and I shook. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I'd been hollowed out. Like someone had reached inside me and ripped out everything that mattered. My office. My future. My belief that my mother loved me. I sat in that parking lot until the sun was high in the sky. I watched people walk in and out of the building. Normal people. People with jobs and plans and lives that made sense. I felt like a ghost. Eventually, I drove home. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember parking. I just remember sitting on my couch and staring at the wall and thinking that I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. I called in sick to the main office, though I wasn't sure I even had a job there anymore. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't respond to texts. Iris called me 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk to her. I couldn't explain what had happened because I didn't understand it myself. I lay on my couch and I replayed everything in my head. Every conversation. Every decision. Every time I'd trusted my mother and let her guide me. I thought about the night she'd hugged me after dinner and told me she was proud. I thought about the way she'd smiled when I told her about my potential client. I thought about how easily she'd taken it all from me. I felt stupid. I felt weak. I felt like I'd spent my entire life trying to earn something that was never going to be mine. On the 3rd night, I couldn't sleep. I got up and made tea. I sat at my kitchen table, and I stared out the window at the lights of the laundromat across the street. The neon sign buzzed. Open 24 hours. I watched people come and go with their baskets of laundry. Their lives were simple, manageable. I envied them. I thought about my father. He'd been gone for 12 years, but I still remembered the things he used to say. He used to tell me that people would try to take things from me. That the world wasn't fair. That I had to be smarter and tougher and more prepared than everyone else if I wanted to survive. I used to think he was being paranoid. I used to think he didn't trust anyone. Now I understood. He'd known what my mother was. He'd known she was ruthless. He'd tried to teach me to be the same way. But I hadn't listened. I'd been too busy trying to make her love me. I opened my laptop. I still had access to some of the company files because my mother had never bothered to change the shared drive passwords. I started looking through documents. Old contracts. Client lists. Financial records. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just needed to do something. I needed to feel like I had some control. And that's when I found it, buried in a folder labeled Archive 2019. There was a contract between my mother and a client named Davidson and Associates. It was a consulting agreement, standard terms. Except for one thing. The contract had been signed by my mother, but the work had been done entirely by me. I remembered the project. I'd worked on it for 3 months. I'd stayed late. I'd rewritten the pitch 4 times. I'd presented the final proposal to the client myself. But the payment had gone to my mother's account. Not the company account. Her personal account. I kept digging. I found 3 more contracts like that. All of them from the past 2 years. All of them for work I'd done. All of them paid directly to her. She'd been skimming. She'd been taking credit for my work and pocketing the money. And she'd been doing it for years. I sat back in my chair. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anger. Cold, sharp, focused anger. She hadn't just taken my office. She'd been stealing from me for years. And she'd done it so smoothly, so casually, that I'd never even noticed. I thought about Garrett. I thought about the way he'd stood in that hallway and said nothing. I thought about the way he'd shrugged when I asked him for help. He'd known. He had to have known. And he'd let it happen because it benefited him. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark. And for the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. I didn't have a plan yet. But I knew I needed one. The next morning, I got dressed. I put on jeans and a sweater. I brushed my hair. I made coffee. I did all the small, normal things that people do when they're pretending their life isn't falling apart. And then I called Iris. She picked up on the second ring. She sounded worried. She asked me where I'd been. She asked me if I was okay. I told her I needed to see her. I told her I'd explain everything. She said she'd meet me at the cafe near her apartment in an hour. I got there first. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner by the window. When Iris walked in, she took one look at me and I could see the concern in her eyes. She sat down across from me. She didn't ask any questions. She just waited. I told her everything. I told her about the office. About my mother and Garrett and the locksmith. About the contracts I'd found. About the money she'd stolen. I told her I wanted to do something about it. I told her I didn't know what, but I couldn't just let it go. Iris listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. She said she wasn't surprised. She said she'd never trusted my mother. She said she'd been waiting for something like this to happen. Then she asked me what I wanted. Not what I thought I should do. What I actually wanted. I thought about it. I could have said I wanted my office back. I could have said I wanted an apology. But that wasn't true. What I wanted was for my mother to feel what I'd felt. I wanted her to know what it was like to have everything taken from you by someone you trusted. I wanted her to lose something she cared about. I wanted her to hurt. I told Iris that. I said it out loud. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. She said she'd help me however she could. We spent the next 2 hours talking through options. I couldn't just confront my mother. She'd deny everything. She'd twist it around and make me look irrational. I couldn't take her to court. I didn't have the money for a lawyer. And even if I did, it would take years. I needed something faster, something smarter. Iris suggested I start documenting everything. Every email, every contract, every financial record I could get my hands on. She said if I was going to take my mother down, I needed to be methodical. I needed proof that couldn't be argued with. So that's what I did. I went home and I started building a file. I downloaded every document I could access from the shared drive. I screenshotted emails. I made copies of invoices. I organized everything into folders by date and client name. It took me 2 full days. I barely slept. I barely ate. But by the time I was done, I had a clear picture of exactly how much my mother had stolen from me. It was over $60,000. Spread across 4 contracts. Money that should have been mine. Money I'd earned. Money she'd taken and used to fund her life while I scraped by in a 1-bedroom apartment. I felt sick. But I also felt clear. I knew what I had to do. I needed to expose her. Not just to me. Not just to Garrett. To everyone. Her clients. Her colleagues. The professional community she'd spent decades building relationships in. I needed to make sure everyone knew exactly who she was. But I couldn't just blast it out recklessly. If I did it wrong, she'd find a way to spin it. She'd paint me as a disgruntled daughter. She'd say I was lying. She'd discredit me before anyone had a chance to listen. I needed leverage. I needed something that would force her to face the truth, without being able to hide behind excuses. And then I remembered something. My mother was on the board of the Portland Business Collective, a nonprofit organization that connected local businesses and provided resources for small business owners. She'd been on the board for 5 years. She was proud of it. She talked about it constantly. It gave her legitimacy. It gave her access to clients and contracts and respect. If I could show the board what she'd done, if I could prove she'd been stealing from her own employee, her own daughter, they'd have no choice but to remove her. It would destroy her reputation. It would cost her clients. It would cost her everything she'd built. I started researching the board. I found their email addresses. I found their meeting schedule. I found out who the president was, a woman named Margaret Cho who ran a marketing firm downtown. I drafted an email. I rewrote it 6 times. I needed it to be professional, factual, unemotional. I needed them to take me seriously. But before I sent it, I needed to make sure my mother couldn't retaliate. I needed to protect myself. So I made copies of everything and sent them to Iris. I sent them to a secure cloud storage account. I printed physical copies and stored them in a safety deposit box at my bank. Then I waited. I spent the next week preparing. I refined my email to the board. I gathered additional documentation. I rehearsed what I would say if they contacted me. I tried to think through every possible way my mother could respond and how I'd counter it. But doubt crept in. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd think about what I was about to do. I'd think about the fact that I was going to publicly accuse my mother of fraud. I'd think about Garrett, about how he'd react, about whether he'd ever speak to me again. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself he'd made his choice when he stood in that hallway and said nothing. But it still hurt. He was my brother. We'd grown up together. We'd shared a childhood. And now I was about to blow up whatever was left of our family. One night, I almost deleted the email. I almost convinced myself it wasn't worth it. That I should just move on. Find another job. Start over somewhere else. Let my mother win and disappear. But then I thought about the look on her face when she told me I was embarrassing myself. I thought about the way she'd smiled while the locksmith changed my lock. I thought about the $60,000 she'd stolen. And I pressed send. I sent the email to Margaret Cho and 2 other board members I thought would take it seriously. I attached the financial documents. I explained who I was and what I'd discovered. I kept it short. Factual. I didn't beg, I didn't plead. I just laid out the evidence and asked them to review it. Then I waited. 3 days passed. Nothing. No response. No acknowledgement. I started to panic. I thought maybe they'd ignored it. Maybe they'd forwarded it to my mother and warned her. Maybe I'd just handed her the ammunition she needed to destroy me completely. On the 4th day, I got an email. It was from Margaret Cho. She said she'd received my message. She said the board took allegations like this very seriously. She said they would be conducting a preliminary review, and they'd be in touch. It wasn't much. But it was something. 2 days later, my mother called me. I saw her name on the screen and my heart stopped. I almost didn't answer. But I did. I needed to know if she knew. Her voice was calm. Too calm. She asked me how I was doing. She asked if I'd thought about coming back to the main office. She said She'd been talking to Garrett, and they both agreed it would be good for me to get back to work. She said holding on to anger wasn't healthy. I didn't say anything about the email. I didn't give her anything. I just said I was fine. I said I'd think about it. I hung up, but I knew. She didn't know yet. If she knew, she wouldn't have been so casual. She would have been furious. She would have threatened me. The fact that she was still playing nice meant the board hadn't told her, which meant they were taking it seriously. A week later, I got another email from Margaret. She asked if I'd be willing to meet with her and another board member to discuss my claims in more detail. She said it would be informal, confidential. She said they just wanted to understand the situation better. I said yes. We scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday at a coffee shop in Northwest Portland. Neutral ground. I was terrified. I spent the entire weekend going over my documentation. I practiced what I'd say. I tried to anticipate their questions. I barely slept. The day of the meeting, I got there early. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. I sat at a table by the window and watched people walk by. Normal people. People who weren't about to accuse their mother of fraud in front of strangers. Margaret arrived first. She was in her 50s, short gray hair, sharp eyes. She shook my hand. She thanked me for coming. The other board member was a man named Colin, younger, maybe late 30s, with glasses and a kind face. He smiled at me. He said he appreciated my willingness to speak with them. We sat down. Margaret opened a folder. She said she'd reviewed the documents I'd sent. She said they raised serious concerns. She asked me to walk her through what had happened. From the beginning, so I did. I told them everything. About working for my mother. About the contracts. About the office she'd taken from me. About the money. I showed them the invoices. I showed them the bank records. I showed them the emails where she'd reassigned my work to Garrett. They listened. They took notes. They asked clarifying questions. They didn't judge. They didn't dismiss me. They just listened. When I was done, Margaret looked at Colin. He nodded. She looked back at me. She said they'd need to verify everything independently. She said they'd be reaching out to the clients listed in the contracts. She said they'd be requesting financial records from my mother. She said it would take time. She also said that if what I was telling them was true, my mother would be removed from the board. And they'd be recommending that her clients be notified of the findings. I felt something loosen in my chest, relief, validation. Someone believed me, but Margaret also warned me. She said my mother would fight back. She said she'd likely hire a lawyer. She said this could get ugly. She asked me if I was prepared for that. I said yes. I didn't know if it was true. But I said it anyway. The board moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, they'd contacted the clients from the contracts I'd provided. They'd requested financial documentation from my mother. They'd started an official investigation. My mother called me again. This time, her voice wasn't calm. She was angry. She asked me what I'd done. She said the board had contacted her with some ridiculous accusations. She said she knew it was me. She said I was being vindictive and childish, and I was going to regret this. I didn't respond. I just listened. And when she was done yelling, I hung up. The next day, Garrett called. He said I was tearing the family apart. He said I was destroying Mom's reputation over nothing. He said I was jealous and bitter, and I couldn't handle the fact that she was more successful than me. He said I should drop it before I ruined everything. I told him about the $60,000. I told him about the contracts. I told him I had proof. He went quiet. Then he said I was lying. He said I'd doctored the documents. He hung up on me. I didn't hear from either of them for a week. But I knew they were planning something. I could feel it. Then I got a letter. It was from a law firm in downtown Portland. It was a cease and desist. They were threatening to sue me for defamation. They said I'd made false and damaging statements about my mother to the business community. They said if I didn't retract my claims and issue a public apology, they'd pursue legal action. I called Iris. She came over that night. We sat on my couch and read the letter together. She said it was a scare tactic. She said they were trying to intimidate me into backing down. She said I should talk to a lawyer. I didn't have money for a lawyer. But Iris knew someone. A woman named Rachel who did employment law. Iris called her and explained the situation. Rachel agreed to meet with me for free to review the letter. We met 2 days later at her office. She read the cease and desist. She read my documentation. She asked me a lot of questions. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled. She said they didn't have a case. She said everything I'd reported to the board was factual and supported by evidence. She said defamation required proof of falsehood and malicious intent. I had neither. She also said that if they did sue me, I could countersue for the stolen wages. She said I had a strong case. She said she'd represent me on contingency if it came to that. I felt a weight lift. I wasn't alone anymore. I had people on my side. People who believed me. People who were willing to fight for me. Rachel drafted a response to the cease and desist. It was polite but firm. It stated that my claims were factual and supported by documentation. It stated that I had every right to report unethical behavior to a professional organization. It stated that any attempt to sue me would be met with a countersuit for wage theft and emotional distress. She sent it to the law firm. We waited. A week later, the board concluded their investigation. Margaret called me. She said they'd verified my claims. They'd spoken to the clients. They'd reviewed the financial records. They'd found evidence of misappropriation of funds and misrepresentation of work. They were removing my mother from the board effective immediately. They were also drafting a formal statement that would be shared with their membership. I asked her what that meant. She said, it meant my mother's name would be attached to a finding of unethical conduct. It meant her reputation in the Portland business community was over. It meant clients would hear about it. Colleagues would hear about it. She'd be blacklisted. I should have felt triumphant. But I just felt empty. I thanked Margaret. I hung up. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. It wasn't enough. Not yet. The board released their statement 3 days later. It was public. It was posted on their website. It was emailed to their entire membership list, which included hundreds of local business owners, consultants, and entrepreneurs. The statement was professional. It didn't name me, but it named my mother. It outlined the findings: misappropriation of funds, misrepresentation of work, breach of fiduciary duty. It stated that she'd been removed from the board and that member businesses were encouraged to review any existing contracts with her firm. I watched it unfold from my apartment. I didn't have to do anything. The business community did it for me. Within 24 hours, 3 of my mother's largest clients terminated their contracts. I know because one of them reached out to me directly. It was the client from Davidson and Associates, the first contract I'd found. He said he'd had no idea I was the one who'd done the work. He said he was appalled. He said he wanted to hire me directly if I was interested. I was. I said yes. We set up a meeting. By the end of the week, 2 more clients had reached out. They'd all heard about the board's statement. They'd all realized my mother had been taking credit for work she hadn't done. They all wanted to work with me instead. I started getting calls. Emails. People I'd worked with years ago. People who remembered me. People who said they'd always thought I was the real talent behind my mother's firm. People who wanted to hire me. People who wanted to support me. I rented a new office. A better one this time. I paid for it with the advance from my first new contract. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell Garrett. I just did it. My mother tried calling me. I didn't answer. She left voicemails. She said I'd ruined her. She said I'd destroyed everything she'd built. She said I was cruel and ungrateful, and she didn't know who I was anymore. I deleted the voicemails without listening to all of them. Garrett tried reaching out too. He sent me a long text message. He said I'd gone too far. He said I'd humiliated the family. He said Mom was devastated. He said I should be ashamed. I blocked his number. The law firm never followed through on their threat to sue. Rachel said they'd probably realized they didn't have a case. Or they'd realized that suing me would only bring more attention to what my mother had done. Either way, they went silent. 2 months after the board released their statement, I got a call from the landlord of my old office. The one my mother had taken from me. He said my mother had stopped paying rent. He said she'd abandoned the space. He asked if I was still interested in leasing it. I said no. I didn't need it anymore. I had something better, but I did ask him one thing. I asked him if my mother had actually had the legal right to take over the lease like she'd claimed. He paused. Then, he said no. He said she'd lied. He said signing a lease didn't give her the authority to change the locks or take over the space. He said he'd been confused when she called him that morning. But she'd been very convincing. She'd made it sound like it was a family emergency. Like I was having a breakdown. He said he'd felt pressured to go along with it. He apologized. He said he should have called me first. He said he felt terrible. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my new office, and I looked around at the space I'd built, the clients I'd earned, the life I was creating, and I realized something. My mother hadn't just stolen from me. She'd underestimated me. She'd thought I'd crumble. She'd thought I'd crawl back to her and beg for forgiveness. She'd thought I was weak. She was wrong. 6 months later, I was running a successful consulting business. I had 8 clients. I had a part-time assistant. I had a waiting list. I'd made back the money my mother had stolen, and then some. I didn't see her. I didn't talk to her. I didn't go to family events, because there were no family events anymore. Garrett and I didn't speak. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my mother had closed her firm. That she'd moved to Eugene. That she was working as a freelance consultant, but struggling to find clients because word had spread about what she'd done. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel guilty. I felt nothing. Iris and I still met for coffee every week. She was the only person who'd stood by me through everything. She was the only person who'd believed me from the beginning. She asked me once if I regretted it. If I wished I'd handled things differently. I said no. I said my mother had made her choices. I just made sure she faced the consequences. One afternoon, I was working in my office when I got an email. It was from Garrett. The subject line said, "We need to talk." I almost deleted it. But I opened it. He said he'd been thinking about everything that had happened. He said he understood now why I'd done what I'd done. He said he'd found some things in Mom's files after she'd closed the business. Things that made him realize she'd been lying to him too. He said he was sorry. He said he should have believed me. He said he hoped we could talk someday. I didn't respond. I saved the email. But I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Maybe I never would be. He'd stood there and watched her take everything from me. He'd called me jealous and bitter and vindictive. He'd chosen her over me. And now that she was gone, now that there was nothing left to gain from her, he wanted back in. No, he didn't get that. He didn't get to come back when it was convenient. I went back to work. I had a client meeting in an hour. I had proposals to write. I had a business to run. I didn't have time to dwell on the past, but sometimes, late at night, I'd think about my mother. I'd wonder if she ever thought about me. If she ever regretted what she'd done. If she ever realized that she'd lost me the moment she put that key in her purse. I'd think about my father. About the things he'd tried to teach me. About how he'd known the world was cruel and people would try to take things from you. He'd been right. I wished I'd listened to him sooner. I'd think about the person I'd been before all of this. The person who believed in loyalty and family, and doing the right thing. That person was gone. I'd killed her the day I sent that email to the board. And I didn't miss her. I was harder now. Sharper. I trusted less. I smiled less. But I was free. I was building something that was mine. Something no one could take from me. And that was enough. I still live in Portland. I still run my business. I still meet Iris for coffee every week. My life is quieter now. Simpler. I don't talk about my mother. I don't talk about what happened. Most people don't even know. They just know me as Ren, the consultant who does good work and doesn't waste time. Sometimes I drive past the building where my old office was. The one she took from me. There's a new tenant there now. A yoga studio. The windows have curtains with lotus flowers on them. It looks nothing like it did when it was mine. I don't feel anything when I see it. It's just a building. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I survived. I fought back. I took everything she tried to take from me, and I built it into something better. I didn't just survive her. I outlasted her. People ask me sometimes if I think I'll ever reconcile with my family. If I'll ever talk to my mother again. I say I don't know. I say maybe. But I'm lying. I know the answer. It's no. She burned that bridge the moment she told me I was embarrassing myself. And I'm not interested in rebuilding it. I learned something through all of this. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. I learned that loyalty is a choice, not an obligation. I learned that you can't trust someone just because they share your blood. And I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud or violent or dramatic. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well. Building something they can't touch. Becoming someone they can't control. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. I'm not softer or kinder or more forgiving. I'm colder. I'm harder. But I'm also stronger. I'm also free. And that's worth everything I lost. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. And if you've ever had someone try to take something from you, I hope you fought back. I hope you didn't let them win. I hope you became someone they couldn't break.